Hello and welcome to My Voice podcast. I'm Alex Wilkinson, a sport and exercise psychology student from Loughborough University. I'm currently on an internship with Sport and Communities, who are a community development organisation that supports all members of the community, from young to old, across a broad spectrum of needs. This podcast is part of the My Voice project, a national community lottery-funded programme that helps to give young people a voice in their community and a platform for creating change and social action. Thank you for taking the time to join me, and welcome to My Voice podcast. I've got today with me Dave Richards, who's been on the podcast many times now. So welcome back, Dave. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, mate. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for coming on today. And we've actually got a new guest joining today. Her name's Danny, and she used to do some work with us at Sport and Community. So would you like to introduce yourself, Danny?
I'm Danny. Worked for Sport and Communities for about 6.5 years, doing different levels. Went from volunteer to paid coach to then doing different projects in the community to then doing projects in care homes.
Well, thank you very much for coming back on today and joining us and having a discussion. This week's podcast is about making decisions and how we make decisions and those life decisions and how they affect our own lives. But I've got a question for the both of you now. First of all, how many decisions do you think an average adult makes each day? This surprised me, actually, the answer to this. How many do you think, Dave?
Decisions each day. Well, we make decisions every minute. So I'm going to have to say, 2,000 decisions at least. Yeah.
Okay. What about yourself, Danny?
I wouldn't go that far. It depends what decisions you're making, doesn't it? I'm going to go 500.
Okay, 500. The answer, which was done by researchers, actually found that on average, an adult makes 35,000 decisions every day. And the majority of these decisions are repeated on a daily occurrence, and each decision comes with consequence, either good or bad. And we make it through each day, and subconsciously we learn from each decision we make. Every day that we wake up, we make the decision to either get up or what we eat, how we brush our teeth, when we brush our teeth. And decisions are just constantly happening every minute. And each hour we get between sort of 1,500 and 2,000 decisions. And these are just constantly, when you're driving, every step that you take in life is a sort of a decision, a yes or no choice. But it's quite interesting. I didn't think it'd be that high. I don't know what you think, Dave.
No, I didn't think it was that high. I knew it was a bigger figure, but I suppose when you think about it, you even making the decision to, we subconsciously make decisions. So subconsciously blinking, that's a decision we make, our brain makes. So I think it's interesting that is the case. And we say 35,000 decisions a day. It feels like we don't have the time of the day to actually do those decisions.
It just shows on a busy day how many decisions and how tired you feel. If you've spent a long day working, you've made so many decisions that day, you feel exhausted by the end, don't you? And your brain's worked so hard to figure it all out.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's certain decisions. I think require. I've got bigger magnitude, so obviously the more conscious you, the bigger the decisions, the more conscious. I think the ones that we naturally, naturally take up. Things like the need to eat is based on response. So I imagine that's where I imagine that's where they come from. I find it amazing how we make these decisions, and the process we have to take to make those.
Yeah, it happens so quickly, and often, like you say, it's subconscious results and processes. Danny, I've got a question for you. How do you make small decisions? So everyday small decisions. How do you think you make them? Because a lot of people might use methods of weighing up the possibility of either the good or the bad. I mean, for example, let's take food. I mean, do people use their intuition and just select a random food, or do you think about the food as you weigh up the pros and cons of it, the good and the bad of the food choice?
No, I think I just eat until I'm full. Like, I won't lie to you. I think it's just eat as much as I can, or find whatever I can eat and just eat until I'm full.
That's really interesting.
No decision goes into it.
It just happens.
Yeah.
Because it's funny, I always think that people are so different. Like you say, you'll just make the choice and you'll eat. And maybe subconsciously you'll think an idea will come into your head of what you'd like to eat. But I think for a lot of people, food is quite a sometimes conscious choice, and people are trying to think about trying to eat healthily, or people think about calories, people think about what's in the food, and then people think how it tastes. And throughout all those miniature decisions, you then get an overall decision about what you're going to eat. And I think sometimes I'll stand there in the kitchen and I'll think how it tastes. I can literally think now the question got brought up, I think, I wonder how that would taste. I wonder what I fancy. And you almost imagine what it tastes like in your mouth and see if you want that food at that time. It's quite interesting.
See, it's interesting you mentioned that, because obviously, whilst we're talking about it at the moment, I'm actually considering what to have for tea tonight because we're talking about this particular subject. So it's actually quite. I find that quite interesting how that's just like triggers can make you decide something, and that's like even as something as simple as deciding what to have for tea tonight, even though it's only like 2:20. I'm thinking I'm thinking, oh, I'm hungry now, but I want something for tea later. What am I going to have? So, it's like I'm complete opposite to Danny there. I have to weigh up everything that is them eating. So like I have to literally think how, is it going to fill me up? First of all, is a big one, obviously. And then I would think actually, how much this food actually cost me that I've got, how much, is it going to contribute to me training? Is it going to contribute towards a lot of other things? And I think that's just me personally. But it's interesting how it's different for other people.
Yeah, and there's no wrong or right way of making decisions on things like that because people have different requirements and different habits. What would you consider to be a important decision, though? What do you think in life people have to make choices? What would you consider to be an important decision that people have to make?
When to cross the road.
Yeah,
that's important.
Very important. It's a massively important. Because it's a life changing decision, isn't it? If you don't get it right, then you could get seriously injured. So no, that's definitely an important decision on an everyday choice that we make. But what about on a more lifetime kind of scale? What do you think would be an important decision? Sort of random important decisions that people think about or choose to make?
I think for me, it's weighing up what the impact of that decision. So when I'm talking about, for me, big decisions are like things that have probably a bigger consequence or a bigger risk. So, for instance, for me, moving house would be a big risk. So it's a massive decision.
Yeah, definitely.
That's what I think for me. That's what I consider a big decision. I know what you're saying there, Danny, about sort of crossing the road, because like all the other decisions that you make, if you get that decision wrong, it doesn't make a difference. You get run over by a car. You're not going to sort of. The other decisions are null and void. So it's interesting how they all sort of. It's a domino effect with that.
Well, some of them, for example, they could be a big decision for a lot of people. Is should I go on and do further education, later in life, people will make a big decision and think, oh, should I have children? Should I move abroad? They're all sort of big decisions that people sort of make throughout their life, and they actually have massive implications later along the line. Some decisions we actively seek advice as well to help make the right choice. I mean, there's probably been a situation where you two both actively asked for advice for a decision that you've had to make, and our brain actually only listens to part of that advice, and the rest of it hears the parts which confirm what we wanted to hear. So if you've ever gone and asked someone for help and they've given a very even argument, expressing both sides, your brain's probably subconsciously sided with one of their decisions because it actually supports your own views, which I thought was quite interesting when reading about. I'm just curious for you both, what do you think is your biggest decision that you've had to make in your life so far? In the 25 years you've been alive, or however long, what do you reckon your biggest decision you've made in your life?
Oh, I'd say probably walking away from abuse, or anything along the lines of you've got so walking away. I obviously had to walk away at 18 from obviously family problems. That was a big decision. But then saying that, leaving sporting communities, that was a big decision. And I think I sat and really thought about leaving, and I didn't want to. And I tried, and I thought in my head, there's pros and cons to leaving. There's pros and cons to staying. And I think at the end of what I decided was I was basically going to wing it, hope that this job goes really well, and we'd go from there basically. But after a couple of weeks I thought, well, I could have really stayed at sporting communities. Maybe I've messed up there. Maybe I didn't put a lot of thinking into it. But I suppose that's always gonna be at the back of your head, that, isn't it?
Yeah, whatever the decision, either way. But there are some great examples of big decisions, because a big decision, like Dave was saying earlier, often has big repercussions or consequences afterwards. I think my biggest decision was deciding to actually go into university, which ended up opening so many doors for myself. But I never had the plans or ambitions when I was younger to actually go to university. It was never on my radar. And as I grew up and became more mature, and I think there was different event nights where universities talked about it, and slowly and surely your decision over like 10 years actually changed, and the weighting changed of it, and you understood the other side. And I'm very, very happy and pleased that I made that decision to go to uni, because in my eyes that's quite a life-changing decision. I mean, it ends up opening a whole new world and you sort of start another life. What about yourself, Dave? What do you reckon your biggest decision has been? Most important?
I think mine's similar in that. I think career choice, particularly for me. I started out doing joinery after sixth form, and turned out that wasn't the right thing for me. I ended up through no fault of my own, laid off where I was, and it meant I was completing an apprenticeship without actually having an apprenticeship role, which was I found, and I just, it felt like I was living a part of somebody else's life because of that, and felt like it wasn't for me. So the big decision was for me to go back into another subject, which was sport, a subject that I had a keen interest on. But I had to make the decision within a split second, because the course was due to start the next day. So I think for me, that was a huge turning point. It literally was in the space of 24 hours that decision was made, and I was on the course the next day, going through all the introductions. So that was a big one for me. I think because that's led to where I am now. Whereas I think if I hadn't made that decision, I wouldn't be sat where I am now. So yeah, for me, that was definitely a big change.
I can imagine it would be, because changing your whole career. And similar to Danny, like she said she was leaving one profession in sport and going into the caring industry. And these decisions, sometimes you look back and you think whether it's for the best but for most people, do you think it's hard to change your mind once you've realised maybe it's not the right decision? Do you think it's harder to go back and change that decision?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, because like I said, 3 weeks into this new job, I was like, I've made the wrong decision. Going to have to deal with the consequences now, and stick it out. 3 weeks in, 4 weeks in, maybe, I thought, this isn't really what I want to do. And like I say, I wish I'd stayed in the sport industry. But in a way, I wanted to try something new. And I tried it, and it wasn't what I expected. So I suppose, like Dave said earlier, I think you have to just deal with the consequences of your actions. But saying that, I've never really been very good at making my own decisions. I've always thought on my feet and then gone with the rest of the crowd, really. So obviously, like I say, sitting back and going, should I leave sporting communities? Should I stay at sporting communities? Maybe I could do 2 jobs. Maybe I couldn't. What impact's it going to have on, obviously, the community, on my health? And it was really difficult, to be fair. I really struggled on that aspect.
And it's interesting there, because you're saying like there's so many factors involved in that decision, but maybe changing your mind on a decision, that's harder than making the original decision, which is quite interesting, because at one point that was the right decision in your mind, and that's the decision that you chose to go down. So it's often hard to understand what the outcome really is going to be unless you go down there. And I always think there's a story, and I find it incredible that such small choices can lead to such big implications. There was a story from a man in America that was taking his daughter to school, and on a certain day he took his daughter to school, but she was running late, and I don't know if she'd forgotten her sports kit or something, but they had to go back home quickly, get the sports kit, and then he carried on to school, dropped her off at school late, and so he ended up getting to work late. And on his way into work, the first plane crashed into one of the 9/11 buildings, and he worked on the 50th floor of the of one of the Twin Towers. And you think, well, that's amazing, because if he was on time that day to work, he would have been in that building and possibly lost his life. And you think such a small implication of his daughter forgetting or not consciously thinking about her being on time to school, and he ended up getting stuck in traffic and everything like that. It had such a big impact later on in your life. It's that magnitude of decision making's just scary, isn't it?
It all flows. I think when we talk about making decisions, we all see them as individual decisions, but ultimately they you make a decision based on what's the best outcome. So all other decisions that you'll make, even though some of them may be subconscious decisions, some of them you may be well aware of those decisions and have to make. And I always see life as you hit a crossroads, and if you always go, well, let's try one way, let's try that way, or try that way, and you've got to go one way or the other. However, that doesn't mean I don't think you can't come back to that crossroads and go another way if it doesn't work out. So what I'm saying there is like this: if you make a decision and you think no, it's not the right decision, you can then make other decisions that help to solve that problem. So I remember listening to an audiobook, and they actually said on there that actually happiness and being satisfied with life is actually solving problems. So you've got less problems to like sort of smaller problems. Yeah, you'll always have problems. There will always be situations going on. The problems are actually the reasons why you make the decisions. Because, for instance, say if we didn't, I'm just going to use an example. Say if we didn't eat or make the decision to eat, we wouldn't survive. That's just the way it is. So,
that's innate in us. That's in our DNA. That's in our survival instincts to actually do those things, and those decisions are natural to us. You don't really take a conscious effort to do that. Sometimes you might forget, but you never truly forget to eat because your body is always reminding you of that decision. And our decisions are actually influenced in so many different ways. Danny, could you give me a way that you think a decision could be influenced? It could be anything. What do you think influences a decision that you'd have to make?
So
it could be physical. It could be a physical thing. Everyone's different, I think.
So when I sat down with Ross and said, right, I'm thinking of leaving, do you think this is the best for me? Or do you think I'm making a mistake? He turned around and said, you're really good at what you do, Dan. If that's what you want to do, go and do it. So I suppose I'd say 90% of it was Ross obviously saying, yeah, you're good at what you do, go and do it. And I suppose in a way, Ross made me mind up. But until that, I was in two minds of whether going, actually, I'll stay at sporting communities, see it through. But then I was in another mind of going, actually, no, I've been at sporting communities long enough now. It's time for a change.
Yeah.
And I think, like I say, I think if it wasn't for obviously Ross saying, Dan, if you want to do it, go and do it, I don't think I'd have sat obviously in that meeting on the Tuesday night and gone, right, I'm going.
And though people, in that sense, they influence you because they're peers and their friends and their family. And I think influences like that are really positive sometimes. But even like something just as simple as like your environment. So say if you were there sat down in a warm, comforting environment with a hot drink, you're more likely to make a positive perception of something. So say if I asked you to make a decision on whether you want to buy a car, if I was giving you lots of warm drinks and you were sat down in a big comfy sofa, you feel more relaxed. And there's so many influences and factors in our life that make our decisions for us almost. Dave, you've probably found that throughout your life, like when you're feeling comfortable, you can make clearer, happier decisions, even like how you view people. And like the language of what people use or the questions on a survey, if you're using positively influencing questions, and people give a more positive result. And that's a bad survey in that effect, but it's amazing how little simple things altogether can end up making a big impact on your overall decision.
Yeah, because what you expect is when you're making a decision, you want to make a decision based on the raw information that's provided, and sometimes, but we are all human. We do have an emotional state, so we do we emotionally connect what we do. For instance, there's been talk. I've had conversations with my other half about us moving back to my home village. And even though, yes, for me, there's an emotional connection because of, and that would influence my decision massively. And being comfortable in that environment, whereas where I've moved to, I'm less comfortable because it's a new area for me. Whilst for my other half, it's a comfortable area because we've moved into an area which is she's familiar with, whereas for me it's a bit different. So, and I think that will influence my decision massively, but will influence the other half's decision a bit differently. So, it's
and you've grown up in that environment, so that environment actually has positive memories and positive connotations, and you remember those childhood memories in a positive light overall. So that environment of where the house sits, that helps you make your decision because you see it in a positive light. And even something as simple as like your personality, that makes such a big difference to every decision that you make in life. You're a very optimistic, positive person, Dave. So it's not a bad thing, but obviously it's not a bad thing, but as an optimistic person, you may overestimate sort of the positive outcomes of moving over there because you had such positive times there before. It's like when you go on holiday. Have you ever been on holiday? You have a really good holiday. The weather's really good. You have a great time. And it's a good destination. But when you come back and people say, oh, do you want to go back there again? Sometimes people say, no, actually, I don't want to go back there again because they've made the decision that it might not be the same again next year. Are you one of those people where you'd go back to the same place on holiday? Or do you try somewhere new? Because that decision, I think that's quite interesting. Like, if you know something works, why don't you go back there?
Yeah, I don't know if it's different with you, Danny, but for me, if I go somewhere and I go somewhere time and time again, I can get too familiarised with it to a point where I go I sort of starve myself of the opportunity to have other experiences, and I think that is. I think other experience. What I find is experiences will always determine how I perceive things and how I, how my mindset will change based on that experience and the information that's provided to me in that experience, and my emotional connection to that experience. So I went. I've been to. I think one of those examples of a holiday is I went to Egypt and I've never returned. I enjoyed the holiday. I've never returned. And whilst we said we would, we were like, let's try something different. Let's try someone new, or somewhere a bit different. Let's look at different ways, different sort of different experiences. I don't know about you on that one, Danny.
Yeah, like you just said, Dave. I think you get too comfortable, don't you, in the same environment all the time. I think it's like, obviously for me and you, Dave, on a Wednesday night in Biddulph, I think at one point I got too familiar, too comfortable in Biddulph. So when obviously a new challenge come up, even though it was exciting, and I thought, well, leaving Biddulph now to do something else, it was a bit of a shock to the system, really, because obviously I'd built the barriers with the kids, I'd built the relationships with the kids, and like I say, it was the easy option, really. And then obviously when I went into the care rooms and started doing sports in the care rooms, that was a bit different. So I suppose, yeah, I can understand where you're coming from there. But then would you go back to somewhere the same all the time?
And that's the two sides fighting against each other. And I suppose your positive experience of you did care home sessions, sports care home sessions, before you actually made the move of going into care homes full time and doing sports there. Those positive experience, your expectations may have been raised by some of those sessions, but you were comfortable and you're enjoying what you were doing at Biddulph. But your personality is to actually seek challenges. So that's probably a massive factor of why you ended up changing and wanting a new environment, and making that decision to go into the care rooms and do that.
I think it's important to seek new challenges, though. I think we can't. I think when we talk about you'll only ever develop. I'm a firm believer that you'll only ever develop if you're outside your comfort zone. If you're in a comfort zone, you will always follow the same pathway, if that makes sense. I don't think you allow yourself as much opportunity to develop. Whilst we talk about how important how valuable it is to be comfortable, I often don't want to be comfortable, because if I am like sort of out of my comfort zone, I'm able to then look at it and go, right, what am I getting out of this being in here? And I'm then taking a lot of learning on board. Everything that every decision that I personally will make in life will hopefully have some learning with it, and some learning curve that I can look at, reflect on, and then overcome. So I think that's a big point. As I say, I think being in comfort zone for certain situations is important, but when we talk about development, I think, and wanting to improve ourselves, I think being outside the comfort zone is really important.
And I think that point you made there, when you do make a decision, sometimes they're not always the best, but you learn from them. So your positive and optimistic personality, even if you make a bad decision, it's still a good decision because you learn from it eventually. So you can never really make bad decisions if you learn from something. And I think that's just a great way of looking at life, because you'll end up getting through life and you'll learn lots of your bad decisions, and that turns to a good decision then, because you won't repeat it or you'll do things differently. So just a really good point for those people to take away who are listening at home. But I'd just like to say a big thank you to you both for coming on and talking to me today and discussing how we make decisions and what decision making is all about.
Brill. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, Danny, and thank you, Dave. And see you all soon. And make sure you listen next week to My Voice podcast. Thank you all.